dintre. Llavors, okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us in this first online event from the ANC Scotland. Thank you, our organization, our organization coordinators and the speakers that have joined us today, Oriol and James. Bear with us that this is the first time we are doing an event online, so there could be technical problems, so please be patient. Probably all will be fine, but the event will be as follows. So I will first introduce the speakers, and then they will be debating for around 20-25 minutes. And after that, there will be a Q&A session. So if you have questions, please write in the comments in the YouTube channel, and then both speakers will comment on them. And okay, so then I will introduce. So we have here today with us James Puchowski. He's a convener of the Scottish Greens in Edinburgh. He is also a PhD student in linguistics at the Edinburgh University. And he was involved as an international visitor for the 1st of October referendum in Catalonia. His PhD dissertation is devoted to language activism in Catalonia. And then we also have Oriol, who is a chemist and is a member of the ANC since 2012. He's been the coordinator in the ANC Scotland during 4 years, and currently is a bureau member of the EFI, which is an European organization. And that's it. Up to you guys. Please enjoy.
Yeah, I'll start. Just a quick thing. I'm not one of the conveners. I'm the vice convener. I wouldn't want to take away the position from the people that are above me. But no, it's been very good to kind of have this event. It's a shame that we couldn't do it yesterday, obviously, because of yesterday being La Diada of Catalonia, the national day. But basically, as much as this is sort of a debate, it's more of an open discussion. And I don't think there's much that I think myself and Oriol disagree on. There are probably nuanced positions that we have on certain topics. But no, I think considering that yesterday was the National Day of Catalonia, I'll maybe ask Oriol to explain the situation in Catalonia right now with independence and right now with this pandemic being as it is, and basically what's the atmosphere in Catalonia right now.
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello James. Hi, nice to see you again. So well, the situation in Catalonia right now is quite complicated. If you allow me, I think I'll start by explaining a little bit how yesterday went in Catalonia. So as everyone knows, yesterday was the National Day of Catalonia, the 11th of September. And the ANC, as every year for the last 8 years now, had yesterday they organized a big event. But of course, we are in the middle of a huge pandemic affecting everyone in all the world, all the same. So yesterday, of course, this event had to be specific and with some special properties, let's say, some characteristics unusual to previous ones. But that I'm very happy because, well, yesterday when I saw all the images from all the events, they were all held with the best correction that we could imagine, and everyone behaved and everyone maintained the precautions in place, which were basically, there was no huge demonstration of 2 million people as we've seen in Barcelona in 2014 or so, or something like that, but was instead of that over, I think, 100 events all around Catalonia, and in all of them it was like a stationary demonstration, not a moving one, and there was at least 2 meters between each person in each concentration, in each demonstration, and everyone, of course, was wearing a mask. There was like the gel, to wash your hands everywhere in every demonstration. So it was all very safe in that sense. And I'm very pleased to see that even in this current situation that we're living now in Catalonia, but of course also in Scotland, and as I said, all around the world, everything was maintained and all precautions were observed and respected. I know because I've told with some people in the organization of like the high levels of the ANC that they said me that everything was planned, just not for the minimal, but let's go for the most protections that we can get and that we can actually do. So it worked, and so it was a fantastic event. It reunited, I think it was over 50,000 people all around Catalonia, all the demonstrations. That's of course very less than previous years, but that was as well to be expected because of this pandemic. A lot of people didn't want to risk themselves going to an event, even though Assemblea always assured the events will be perfectly safe. All this regarding to the that was yesterday that you, James, mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The situation right now in Catalonia, though, the political situation, is a bit more complex. And by a bit, I mean, in some ways, is a lot more complex, I'm afraid to say. So right now, we have like several parties all pushing towards independence, but each one has a different strategy than the other one. So right now there's a bit of discussion on which is the best strategy, which is the best option that we should follow to achieve independence. Even though, as I said, all parties are for independence. And I think that's probably one of the main differences between Catalonia and Scotland. Know that in Scotland you have mainly two independentist parties, one being the SNP and the other being the Greens, as you yourself are, right, James? So yeah.
Yeah, it's a very different situation, and I understand that there are lots of parallels between the situation in Scotland and Catalonia, and I also am quite aware of the divisiveness, particularly in Catalonia, that independence can cause, because it can. Whereas in Scotland, I think there's a slightly different dynamic. I know that there's also a very, very strong unionist feeling in Catalonia as well, which is kind of far more pronounced. I've found over time. Because it can relate a lot more down to things like ethnicity and stuff like that, and linguistic issues. And I'm quite aware of that in my own research, having spent time in Catalonia and having looked at the sort of work that's done by Catalan language activists. My question, I guess, to you is a slightly polemicized one, slightly controversial one, because we've had to kind of ask ourselves the same question here in Scotland, which is, does being part of Spain for Catalonia, is that actually something that has been very important in order to face the pandemic? If Catalonia were an independent country, would it also be able to face a global pandemic and have survived the situation that we're all living through?
Yes, and in fact, that's as well a question I wanted to ask you about, James. So I would love you to explain to me later. Yeah, here as soon as the pandemic arrived, so let's say mid-March, the central Spanish government in Madrid, they centralized everything related to health, everything related, well, to all the issues affected by the pandemic, directly affected, let's say. So everything was managed from Madrid. Okay, and that of course bears the doubt that maybe we're an independent country would have managed this whole situation differently. You know, I think that differently and probably better. You know, but that's the situation right now here. Yes, it's true. This decentralization is now more or less disappeared. So Catalonia has recovered some, well, most I'd say, of its rule. Okay, right now. But yeah, that's the situation, that when we were in self-isolation, that we weren't allowed to leave home except for shopping some groceries or something, but only very specific occasions, or, to walk the pet, the dog, or whatever. We weren't allowed. It was during this situation that the central government centralized everything. So I would say that the society people were not directly affected because, or it was not very obvious because we weren't allowed to leave home. So there was nothing that we would say, oh shit, now, sorry for the word, we can see that this is different because we have some situation here that we would have managed different. But, because everyone was locked at home, me, myself included, of course, we were not able to see this more than what was told in the news, for example. And that was my question here. Is the same situation in Scotland with Britain?
It's a very complex situation because the way that Spain and the way that the United Kingdom are set up constitutionally are quite different. So the situation that we have in Scotland is that we have a historically independent legal system, and we have basically full control over health and public health and education and all these things, which basically gives a lot of power to the Scottish government. And what we've actually realised is that during this pandemic, as there's been conflicting messages coming from the UK government, which really during the pandemic only seems to have the final say really over what happens in England. And you hear, for example, what you hear the Scottish government say, there's been confused cross-messaging because people are now probably beginning to see actually more vividly what the system of devolution, so the idea that Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have quite a lot of government control, and the UK government has less. People are starting to realise that the Scottish government actually takes responsibility for a good portion of public life now in Scotland. And interestingly, what we've seen is basically poll after poll over the last 3 months show that the support for independence in Scotland, it's within the margin of error, but there's been no poll result that's shown the majority against independence. It's now showing around 50 to 53, 54% of people in Scotland supporting independence. And there has been some sort of say that's in the media as to what extent that's been caused by the pandemic, by people seeing the Scottish government taking actions that are different, being very communicative with people. There is an issue, however. Scotland is not a perfect paradise. We have, I think, the third highest death toll in Europe in Scotland. I think England is number 2, and I can't remember whether it was Spain or Italy that has number 1. And that itself has demonstrated something, which is that even though we have been more, I'd say that the Scottish government has been a lot more transparent and communicative and direct with people than the UK government has been with people in England. The biggest issue, though, is that we were unable to go into lockdown as quickly as maybe we would have liked. And there were lots of experts, of course, at the time telling us to go into lockdown. I guess the issue, the why lots of people like myself want Scotland to be an independent country, is that we would have full control over all aspects of finance and taxation and budget, because a very important part of our lockdown was the furlough scheme. It was basically being able to let people stay at home and not lose money, so they would continue to have their wages paid even though they couldn't go to work. Scotland doesn't have the control for that. It doesn't. There's nothing. There's no prospectus for that to happen in Scotland. So a major issue, for example, is if this were to happen again in the future, is it right, for example, that we have to wait for the UK government? And you have to remember that 85% of the UK's voters and parliamentary seats are English. We have to wait for England to make that decision. And if they are not willing to continue the furlough scheme, that itself means that if in Scotland we need the furlough scheme to continue because we do not think it's safe to go back to normality, that's the issue that we're now facing. And there are questions about that being handed to us. Now, next year we have the Scottish parliamentary election.
Yeah.
We're looking
in May, right?
In May, yes. Yeah. And we're seeing basically, again, with all the pro-independence polling show it, well, being that it is, we're seeing as well that the SNP potentially could increase its seats, become a majority government, or at the very least, we know about 60% of all seats in the parliament, when you add the Greens in, will be pro-independence. Now, I imagine in Catalonia, if 60% of the seats in the parliament were pro-independence, that would also be a major issue.
Yeah.
It would give a lot of energy, but at the same time, this is a pandemic. Things are very uncertain, and I think there are a lot of people in Scotland who are still thinking, if we actually became independent, would we be able to handle this on our own? And it's a good question to ask. What sort of Scotland do we want to be? And in Catalonia, of course, what sort of Catalonia do Catalans and people in Catalonia want? Is it going to be one that's going to respond quicker than the government of Spain did?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, what's happened is been a test, I'd say, for all countries in the world, all of them, without exception. But of course, it's been even a major test for countries such as ours, such as Scotland or Catalonia, because we are countries that we are looking towards an independent, a republic so some kind of, or at least more autonomy. I'd say some other regions. I'm thinking now about Veneto or other regions in Europe, that there are quite a few. So yeah, this has been a test that, of course, has put this question that you were saying in mind of a lot of people around the countries. Could we, as an independent state, manage this better, or manage it at all, or not? Because this has been a situation that, of course, people's lives were at stake, this was the matter of discussion here. So of course it's been a very important matter to discuss. What I as well wanted to say, something that you remembered me, what you were saying before, that in Catalonia we saw in 2017 how the Spanish government as well took the power, centralized the powers basically. So this was not new, that happened now. Okay, yeah, we can say now it was a bit maybe more justified than then. Okay, I can agree at least with that, but not but very much, because as you were saying, and that's the thing that I in fact envy from Scotland. You were saying that you have your own health system and it's very protected, that it will remain Scottish. We in 2017 we saw that not only the health system but all our government could be taken down by the central government, and now they did not only with Catalonia but with all the regions in Spain. But this as well has people now has realized that what we think that we in Catalonia we have, like the own health system and other things like the control of the police, for example, this might not be that protected. That the Spanish government can easily enter any time and take it to themselves, and cancel everything here in Catalonia. So I think that with all this COVID crisis, this is a thing that people also have realized, this fact that, well, maybe we do need to be independent. We do need independence. We do need our own republic, because that's the only way that we can actually control our country, because if not, what we have now is like, it's not a real control, when it's like, a parent that tells his son or daughter, okay, yeah, you can play, but until that time that I say, and at that time I will come and take your toys off. It's a bit like, I see like a bit that like this situation.
And I think what you're mentioning is in parallel with what's currently unfolding up here in Scotland, basically, which is the situation where the Brexit decisions that are being made by the UK government are potentially telling the Scottish government that it can have more powers because of Brexit, because there'll be powers going back from Brussels, for example, to the Scottish Parliament, because that would be what would happen because we're no longer part of the European Union. But those powers that we use, we can no longer use them to be distinct from the rest of the UK. If, for example, we don't want aspects of our public infrastructure to be open to privatization, and that goes against what this Parliament in London would like to do, something to that regard means that the Scottish Parliament becomes basically a rubber stamp parliament, or just a parliament that just has to accept whatever goes in, what happens in Westminster.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing right now, I think, is a challenge to not just Catalonia and Scotland. It's a bit of a luxury problem because we still have a lot of, both Catalonia and Scotland still have a lot of autonomy and a lot of control over these things. It's better than, for example, the situation in some parts of the world where a nation exists but is completely repressed by the state. But it's so uncomfortable because there's so much energy and there's just so much drive to want to do things differently. And as soon as that attempt is made, it can be quashed, it can be crushed, and it can be removed. And I don't understand necessarily why, for example, the Spanish government or the government in London thinks this is a winning formula, because I think this actually creates more resentment and more frustration than it does actually bring together this idea of unity that they're trying to create.
Well, I think one answer of what you were saying, you yourself said, just some minutes ago, that the British Parliament, it consists of an 85% of English MPs, So it's I see it as a balance, saying, okay, do we care, in fact, what people in the regions like Scotland or Catalonia do think or do vote, or we look for the majority of seats that we can get? So I'd say, yeah, most, if not all of the national parties of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, they see it like that, like, okay, or winning, like the goal that we have to get is we have to win in England, to be able to do something, or to be able even to govern the British government. And I'd say it's the same here in Spain. So a lot of parties, I'm thinking now of Partido Popular, the Conservatives, or even the Socialistas, the Labour Party, let's say, to make an analogy between the UK and Spain, is that they say, okay, well, yeah, Catalonia, of course, is important in votes, but it is not that important when you face it to the whole of the rest of Spain, Of course, So is that, yeah, they have their MPs, but we can have a lot more if we have one discourse and we do certain things that might create resentment in Catalonia. Now I'm talking about, but it will not make resentment in the rest of Spain. And in fact, it will gain us votes and opinion polls, let's say, in our party, in the rest of the all Spain. I'm thinking now Madrid or Extremadura or any other region of Spain. And yeah, I would say that's I was trying to give like an answer to what you were questioning now. That that's how I see it. Yeah. Yeah, you have the microphone muted.
Sorry, thank you. I'm just looking at some of the questions we've got in the chat box, and I think basically the general theme is, would having our own countries, would independent Scotland and Catalonia, would that actually would that be better? What are the advantages of independence? What actually is on offer, more so than just not being part of Spain or not being part of the United Kingdom, but what can these two potentially independent countries do that hasn't been done before? I wonder whether you can give a Catalan perspective on that.
Well, I would give a Catalan perspective, but as well like a principles perspective, how I see it. I strongly believe that as closer to you is the administration, it functions better to your interests, to your interests, not like personal interests, but as a society. So that's one of the main reasons for me. Why do I think that an independent Catalonia will work better than being part of Spain? Basically because of that, I would rather have the decisions taken regarding to my country in Barcelona than in Madrid, because Madrid is like 600 kilometers away. Barcelona, well, I live in Barcelona, so it's all the situation of more transparency as well, because if you have your government closer to your place, you know where it is, and this gives as well a sense, I think, to people like this is our government, because for me the government in Madrid, as I said, is like 600 kilometers away. I don't know exactly what's the distance between London and Edinburgh, but there's the distance between Madrid and Barcelona, and that gives a sense of like I'm not part of this government. So that's for once that I think that as closer as the administration is to you, the better it works for your interests as a society. And then, of course, we could talk about all the economy issues that we have. That, of course, is Spain collecting all taxes, and then that they distribute all the money, and we from Catalonia see that it's not evenly distributed, that all that Catalonia pays, we should receive more, not just more money, in Catalonia bank account, let's say, but more investment in infrastructures. We have some railroads that are a shame, like how they are still like they are. We have one railroad, for example, that connects several like region of Catalonia central cities, that it has only one line. So whenever a train goes up, none other can go in the line, until it doubles. But, and it's like a very long piece of train, piece of line of train. And yeah, that's one thing that it has always been like that. Maybe it should be time that we change it. But for that, of course, we need the money that right now we don't have. Laia is here.
Laia is here.
Yeah. It's been now like for 20 minutes, and we have few questions from the audience. Okay. So maybe I'll start from the last one, and I will ask James for his vision. So and then Oriol as well. But so, what do you think that Catalonia and Scotland can learn from this crisis? And if having their own countries would having been better?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we've seen in Scotland, the rest of the UK, and indeed across the whole of Europe, is that there has been a very strong sense of community in some places, where people have looked out for one another. They've done shopping for their neighbours. They've been able to kind of really understand the value of having a functional health service. It's actually quite depressing, for example, to see and contrast what we as Europeans, luckily and are privileged to have in terms of public health services, and to contrast it with, for example, the United States right now, and the way that their own health service, for example, continues to be plagued by this idea of profit and wanting to basically make money out of people's own afflictions and issues. And stuff like this, for example, tells us a lot about, how we can improve the systems that we already have. And in Scotland, we have a publicly owned health service, and it basically reminds us that when it comes to public spending, when it comes, for example, to the sort of jobs that we need to protect and the sort of jobs that we need to respect, healthcare, public services, even people working in supermarkets, people, for example, doing jobs that people might think that are below them, people, for example, that have risks, for example, of contracting coronavirus by interacting with people because they have to. That's the nature of their job. All of these things mean that as new societies, we can learn from that. We can show that we're going to basically make sure that these sort of systems and these sort of this sort of infrastructure cannot be simply removed. It needs to be treasured and respected. And I think having an independent Scotland could do a lot better than probably what the UK government would do. Obviously, the major issue I think on many people's minds is the issue of finance. And I think that's going to be a question that's going to be affecting us all over the next few months as we decide again as to whether we have another independence referendum. But I personally understand that Scotland has the capacity to do a lot more and to basically make it clear, as the Scottish Government has done, and with pressure, for example, from the Scottish Green Party, that certain things are going to have to take precedence. We're not going to let the richest people in society think that we can just get back to normal. We're going to make sure that we work to prevent as many deaths as we can within the capacity that we have, and that's something that I hope an independent Scotland, and I hope also an independent Catalonia, should that happen, would be willing to kind of understand and share.
Oriol, if you want to share your views on this question.
I would say that everything that James has said, it mostly applies as well to Catalonia. So just to emphasize one idea, James, that you've explained, this sense of community that has arisen amongst people of one same city, of one same town. I think this is very important, Here in Catalonia, we've had this we already have, I think, very strong, this sense of community since the 1st of October of 2017, of course. But this, if anything, this crisis has reinforced this sense of community, which I think is crucial for any region or any country in the world, for people to be united and to identify as being in the same situation, if I explain myself. And yes, as well, what you were saying and what I said as well before, just in the question before, I think that as closer the administration is to the people, it works better for the people interested. And here in Catalonia, because we've had this grab of power from Madrid, this has begged this question: should maybe if we had controlled all the situation ourselves from Barcelona, from the Catalan government, would it have been better? Well, I'm a believer that yes, it would have been better, of course. So that's the situation here right now that we're talking about.
So we just have a new question from the audience, and it says if the person has heard that the disagreements amongst independence parties are causing some disillusionment with the grassroots movement, how this is widespread amongst Catalan society.
Yes, it is indeed causing a bit of disillusion amongst the grassroots of the movement. But I'd say to this person to look at the images yesterday. You see, yesterday we had again a huge demonstration in the pandemic that we're living, of course, so under the conditions of the pandemic that we're living just now. But it's causing disillusion. But I think that this disillusion, it goes more towards the parties themselves than independence as a goal. So, people still are independentists, I think, and I believe, but they are simply like less and less the parties themselves, because they are saying that they are arguing between themselves. There's a case right now, for example, of one party that changed its name when this whole process started. Right now, it has divided, and I think at least 3 parties that will run in the next elections. So it's kind of crazy what's going on with some parties in Catalonia. But so I'd say yes, that there is this disillusion, but this disillusion goes more, I think, towards the parties and the political system than independence itself as a goal.
We have another question from the audience, and I think I'll pass it to James. So what's your vision? Do you think that Catalonia and Scotland are close to have their own countries in the middle of the pandemic? Or
I have a very mixed view on this. Obviously, my position is very clear. I as somebody who lives in Scotland, I've lived in Scotland since 2013. I vote here. This is my home now. This is my flat. I'm very happy to be here. And a member of a party that supports independence. Yes, I think Scotland should be an independent country. Whether or not it's close to having its own country is another issue. But I think it's actually a question now of time in Scotland. Every single poll is showing that if you are under the age of 55, the majority of people are already pro-independence, not like 52, 53, we're talking towards 60, 65. And then you go to people under the age of 35, so the kind of millennials, the younger generations, 3/4, 75% of people polled are pro-independence. And that means that the number for pro-independence number in Scotland is not going to go down over time, it's only going to go up, because those numbers are just too big to ignore.
Yeah.
The question, though, that we're going to be asking ourselves, though, is how can we make that effective? Because in order for us to have a legal referendum, and we have decided, the Greens and the SNP have all said before, we will not do a unilateral declaration of independence. The only way that we have the legitimacy of independence is by having a referendum that is accepted and people accept the outcome. And that's going to be the challenge now, because in order for us to have that, we need permission from the Westminster government. And the question will be, is next year when we have that massive election in May, that's going to be very, very important for Scotland and its future. If there is such a dominant pro-independence result in that election, it's going to be very difficult over the next 5 years, I believe, for the Westminster government to just ignore the call for it, because that means there may even be signs that the Scottish government will no longer want to cooperate with the UK government on certain issues. But we don't know. I mean, nobody knew this time last year that a pandemic and a hard Brexit was coming. So who knows what's going to happen over the next 5 years. But one thing is for certain, that it's now a matter of time. It's not a question of how, but the question of when for many of us. In Catalonia, obviously, I know Catalonia primarily through my work in linguistics and through my translation work. I do believe that there's an issue right now with the fact that the biggest hampering issue to the Catalan independence is that you have a state that will not even legitimize the discourse. You have a Spanish state that doesn't want a referendum, not because necessarily they think that they're going to lose. I think the whole point is, if you have a referendum that is sponsored, that is given permission from the Spanish government in order to have, that basically legitimizes the idea that independence is a political project that is worthy of happening. And we're seeing this right now, that I don't know, I'd like to imagine that in Catalonia there's also growing young support for independence, but it's very difficult to tell, because Catalonia is a tapestry of people from all parts of the world. It's not just Catalan speakers, you have first language Castilian speakers, you have people from heritage backgrounds, you have people from Latin America, you have a very diverse population, and so many different conversations going on. But what is very clear is that with every poll in Catalonia, the call for independence is not going down either. But the question is, can it gain more momentum? And when it does, when will the people of Catalonia, as they have done time and time again, both people who are for independence and against independence, because we know the majority of people in Catalonia want a referendum, whether or not they want independence is a completely other issue, but we know that there's a desire for a referendum. The question is, when will people take to the streets again and demand for it to happen, and won't take no for an answer? That's the question.
I'm gonna ask the same question to Oriol, and then we're getting closer to almost 35 minutes. So Oriol, what do you think, how is the situation now in Catalonia and in Scotland? Do you think, in your own view, that they are closer to independence, or it's a long-term vision?
Yeah. Well, I arrived in Scotland, in fact, in 2016. So just after, in fact, the Brexit referendum. And I, of course, saw the referendum happening. And I saw it as well that it would cause a boost in independence, because in the independence referendum that Scotland held in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, right? It was said from the British government, if you get independent, you will leave the EU. And now people voted no to independence, and now they're saying how even they voted no, they are leaving the EU and by force. They had no real voice on it, because, as we were saying, no, all the political weight of the United Kingdom is decided in England, not Scotland and not Wales, and not Northern Ireland, of course. So I'd say that, yes, that's the situation. And well, James was speaking about the figures here that we're dealing with, and they are amazing. So congratulations, people of Scotland, for having reached the point of 75% on the younger generations. Here in Catalonia, I think it was boosted for a while, but now it's true that maybe we have arrived to a point that we are not increasing a lot more, but as James said, we are also not decreasing anymore. So, and this point is exactly 50-50. So as James was saying, we need just more momentum now to push again the independentist movement to reach these figures that James was explaining about Scotland, so that we can really achieve our final goal, that is the independence, and it's the constitution of the Catalan Republic. But for yes, maybe this boost that we'll need will come from this crisis that we're living just now. Maybe. I'm no foreteller, so I'm not able to say, unfortunately. But yeah.
No, it's very uncertain now. I think it's just the question. Everything's very uncertain. I think, there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to be asked, not just in Catalonia and Scotland, but all around the world, as to what sort of government people want to have. What sort of role should government play? Is it up to us as individuals to tackle big crises, or do we need to work collectively towards common goals? And what sort of collective that we're talking about? People, rightly so, will say that the nations of the United Kingdom should work together, and that's the coronavirus is an example of how we've done that. I'm sure the people in Catalonia thinking, no, well, Spain has stuck together and also has come out of this. But I think ultimately there have been mistakes that have been very, very vital in both countries that have demonstrated that there's a lot to learn. And that should hopefully, I'd imagine, even in tough times, that should give people inspiration as to how to improve things, rather than simply settling for whatever the status quo is. But, I think that's the opinion of someone like me, who's a bit of a romantic when it comes to political issues. I like to imagine that people do have a part of them that wants to improve things. So yes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I identify as well as a politically romantic person, as you were saying.
So I don't know if you want to wrap it up, or do you have anything else to discuss? It's been now 40 minutes of discussion. So for the final 35 minutes it's been. So there are no more questions from no more questions at the moment.
I think I don't. Do you have any questions yourself? I say I put you on the spot now. No.
My only question is just do you think that the politicians? I'm not too much on Scotland. I don't follow politics in Scotland that much, but at least in Catalonia, what's your vision? Did they play with the people when they were pushing for legislation? Because, for instance, this last week, in the Parliament of Catalonia, they have put forward a legislation for renting.
For controlling the rents.
Exactly. Yeah. And apparently, the legal services, they've been telling them that they don't have the powers to rule this law, but they did it anyway. What's your view on this? Because for me, it's I'm paying this parliament. There is 100 people that they have a salary each month, and they are just passing legislation that they are not supposed to be passing. They are wasting time in a way. It could be a view.
Yeah, as I see it, it's a very interesting question indeed. As I see it, is related to what I was answering before, that as closer as the administration is to the people, it works better for the interests of these people, of this collective, of this society. And one important thing, of course, is controlling the rents. This, namely, establishes the rents should be between this number and between this number and this number, so we can have any landlord overpricing his or her flats a lot. So that I think, James, that's a a situation that it's been talked about in Scotland as well these last years that I was living there in Glasgow. So that's the situation that I was explaining before, Laia, that I think the Catalan Parliament should pass laws like that, even though if it's not clear, the legal assessors of Parliament say you can do that, but well, if they do it, they can, let's say, do it in the more practical way because they are doing it. So, and that's the thing I believe in, that we need to be passing these laws. For example, in August as well, the Catalan Parliament approves a declaration against monarchy, against the Spanish king, that, as I'm sure all our viewers have seen by now. He's right now in Saudi Arabia, because, well, it's been more or less proven that he's been stealing money and don't know how many things, So we have this kind of monarchy in Spain, and it's shameful to look at. And so the Catalan Parliament passed as well this law. And from the Spanish government and from the same assessors that I were mentioning, they said, well, Catalan Parliament can't really rule on that, can't really do anything about the monarchy, because that's a state thing. Exactly. Okay, but what if the state, it's us now, it's Catalonia, its own state. And that's the whole meaning I find with the laws that you were saying.
What's your vision on this? Imagine like the Scottish Parliament, James, with passing laws that they don't have the transferred powers to. How would this be perceived in Scotland, in your view?
Well, this is the irony. I think we for a long time we've actually had the liberty to pass laws on many different things that have been very much within our powers. We have control over health. We have control over the legal system. We have control over education. And if the UK government were to ever step in and take that away, that would actually be breaking many kind of parliamentary conventions. That would be seen as highly controversial, and it would actually lead to the Scottish government challenging the UK government in court, because the UK government has signed up through the system to several conventions. The idea, for example, that the UK government will never step in on Scottish issues without the consent of the Scottish people who elect people to Parliament. But what we're seeing now, especially right now, as the Conservative government in the UK is putting through its Brexit ideas and is basically trying to set itself up to do trade deals all around the world, what we're seeing is that if the Scottish government in the future, the Scottish Parliament wants, for example, to pursue policies that are distinct from what the rest of the UK wants, if that in any way stops the UK functioning in trade, the UK government will basically veto any Scottish legislation. So let's say, for example, that in Scotland, we have a very strong farming and agricultural industry, something that I think many of us are quite proud of. And let's say, for example, that we want to keep European food standards. Let's say that is passed in the Scottish Parliament. If those standards go against the food standards and the certain ideas that are passed in the UK Parliament, what will happen is that the Scottish Parliament will be told, you are basically acting in a way that is disrupting the internal workings of the United Kingdom. Therefore, we have to reject your law. But the irony is that we're being told constantly how powerful the Scottish Parliament is. But the irony is that we've been told how powerful this Parliament will be in the future, whilst at the same time, should we decide to use any of our powers to disagree with the UK, that would basically be vetoed. And it's turning our democracy into something that is not very effective. It no longer becomes a voice of protest and a voice of social change. It simply becomes just another layer of bureaucracy. So I'm a little bit concerned about this, because I think democracy starts from the grassroots. I very much agree with Oriol that the closer your democracy is to you, the more legitimate it is. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the whole thing. I think it's very difficult to. I think if you're a young person, if you are fond of the European Union, if you want to cooperate with other nations, and you're being shown this United Kingdom, and you're told that you have to stay in it because in 2014 you voted no. I think a lot of people are just absolutely gobsmacked that's what people are being told, because many of us are thinking, well, we voted to stay in a different United Kingdom. The United Kingdom we have now is so totally different from the UK government that we had in 2014. It wasn't a UK outside of the EU, and it wasn't a UK government that was willing to get rid of so many regulations. So I think I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but it's really important to say that, you know, a lot of us have, like in Catalonia with after the transition and everything, people fought to get their parliament and their government back.